First of all, I would like to have the Japanese and the Russian guests to give us some very brief assessment about the result of this time's the two leaders meeting between President Putin and Prime Minister Abe. Mr. Shimatsu, would you like to go first?
Well, I think President Putin really made some indications that there will eventually be a deal on the Northern Islands if the economic cooperation proceeds. So I don't think this is in any way a setback or a slowdown. And in fact, I think the really big ticket items in the there were something like about 8-9 memorandums signed, and these are really large ticket items: the oil exploration, possible pipelines, nuclear energy cooperation, banking, and also Japanese participation in building a new airport at Kabaras. So basically, this ends whatever there was left of the sanctions regime on Russia. Japan never had such strong ones, but this basically pulls Japan out of the whole sanctions that the U.S. has insisted on, and also its European allies, NATO allies.
I see.
So this is, I think, a major step.
Mr. Tavrovsky, coming from Russia, on the phone for us, what do you think? Do you really agree with your Japanese counterpart that by having these kinds of cooperations on the economic joint development on these four islands, namely meaning that Japan has scrapped off all the sanctions against Russia?
No, unfortunately, I cannot share the gentleman's opinion. I think in general, President Putin's visit to Japan was very efficient, very satisfactory. It opens new perspective for economic cooperation, and it offers a way to finally work out and sign a peace treaty. Although, we don't have any peace treaty with Germany. We don't have any peace treaty with Japan, and we somehow survived all those years. But okay, we can use another solid document. But those papers won't open a way to giving Japan 1, 2, 3, 4, or 100 islands. I'm sure that Putin is not a man to sell Russian territory.
At this point, we understand there are several things that the two sides have agreed to jointly develop on those four islands. For example, tourism, fishery, health, and the environment. Mr. Tavrovsky, how important are these four areas concerning Russia's economy? After all, it is economic development on these four islands and four islands alone.
This is very symbolic importance. There are several thousand people living there. So if there'll be 300, 500 more jobs there, it will be important for them. But in terms of Russia, it's minuscule. So it's just a start of bettering relations. But what's important, whether the United States will allow Japan to stand by those papers signed today in Tokyo.
Right.
Because we know many times Moscow and Tokyo agreed on something, and then Washington interfered, and Japan said, "Sumimasen, sorry," and backed away.
Well, I have to ask Mr. Shimatsu, is Japan gonna say once again, "Sumimasen, this time so sorry"? Because of U.S. possible involvement and interruption?
Well, this is a pretty bold move, but it also happens in the lame duck period of the Obama administration.
Right.
And as you know, Prime Minister Abe did talk to President-elect Trump. I think he realized that Trump is not going to continue with the policies of the last 60 years. So I think Shinzo Abe is trying to make a preemptive move here to move ahead the agenda and move into the next phase. The G7 is something from the last century. It doesn't reflect the economic realities of today. And the security treaty, already there's enough tension with the incoming Trump administration for Shinzo Abe to look for a different security formula. So, yeah, I think he decided to take the first step rather than wait and see.
Well, Mr. Shimatsu, you know very well, it is not the very first time that Prime Minister Abe from Japan trying to be on a good term with the Russian counterpart, Mr. Putin. After all, Mr. Abe even gave Mr. Putin, who is a dog lover, a wonderful dog. And this time, right before his trip, Mr. Putin demonstrated how beautiful that dog is in front of Japanese journalists, even though the dog keep on barking. If we could play that little, roll that tape for our viewers a little bit, our editors over there. So what does that really say? I mean, one try after another from Tokyo for Moscow to work together. How much do you think Japan has been trying? Has it been reaching eventually some great result? So, Mr. Shimatsu, what do you think?
Well, I think what this move is not so unusual. I mean, if you look at it, let's say from the framework of the Japan-U.S. alliance, but Russia and Japan did have a neutrality agreement before World War II, from 1939 until the last 8 days before the end of World War II. And this was not an alliance. It was a bilateral relationship in which each party had separate agendas, but they did not need to have a conflict between them. And I think Shinzo Abe understands that history very well. It's called the Matsuoka Molotov Agreement, or also the Non-Aggression Pact. So I think there's a historical precedent here, and it did carry Japan through the war years. And the problem for China, of course, is that will allow Japan to focus more of its attention security-wise on China, and it won't have to worry as much about the Russian neighbor.
Right, but Mr. Tavrovsky on the phone, is the picture likely to change that fast? I mean, at this point, it is almost a vacuum in Washington between two administrations. The next president-elect, Mr. Trump, talked favorably during his campaign about Russia, and yet the Washington machine is not likely to favor him in that regard. So how much chance really Tokyo and Moscow have during this vacuum of power in Washington?
Well, I think we should wait, and wait, because, Mr. Trump is, let's say, unpredictable, and nobody knows actually what will happen after the inauguration. I think that, of course, our diplomats should start a new chapter. We'll start to work on the new treaty. But let's remember history, that in 1956, we almost signed the treaty, and Americans stopped us. Then in 1960, Japan and China signed this mutual defense treaty, and there are until today so many American military bases. Actually, one of them, Iwakuni, is just 10 miles from the place where Prime Minister Abe and President Putin met. And there are other bases. And President-elect Trump didn't say a word about getting them out of Japan. So I'm not sure whether Russia will sign a new treaty, peace treaty with Japan, when American rockets, American fighters and bombers are so close to Russian territory. Because it was what happened in 1960. We refused to sign, to stand by this declaration about giving two islands, exactly because of all those bases and this mutual defense treaty.
Yes, indeed.
It is still on the table.
It is still on the table. According to not only the statement about the future of the bilateral relations, but also Mr. Putin, the president of Russia's statement about the 4 islands alone. He talked about very long term to eventually achieve a resolution. Of course, the word he used here, once again, is the long term. So what exactly is the specific document that all sides seem to look at, and yet not able to sign. That is the peace treaty. What is the peace treaty? Before the meeting, Japan has hoped to sign a peace treaty with Russia. Take a look at this.
Of World War II, the Soviet Union controlled the disputed South Korea islands, but Soviet Union and Japan never signed a peace treaty to officially end the war. In 1956, Moscow and Tokyo signed a declaration to formally restore diplomatic relations. By signing the document, the Soviet Union made commitments not to seek reparations for the war and to hand over sovereignty of 2 of the 4 islands captured by Soviet troops back under Japanese jurisdiction. According to the declaration, this would happen after signing a comprehensive peace treaty. In 1960, after Japan signed a military alliance with the US, Moscow said the island's status would be de facto since it could not allow its Cold War rivals to place troops closer to the Soviet territory.
All right. Well, that is the peace treaty. Obviously, it's not being signed now, but what about it for China? I mean, China in the territory, China's neighbor Japan, and also Russia. Some have been talking about, Mr. Jia, the so-called trilateral relations, and yet China never believed in this triangular, which is the United States, Russia, and China. Some say 2 parties getting close means getting more distance away for the other 2 parties. What is your take from China's perspective about the latest development between Tokyo and Moscow, the latest interaction?
I believe that actually China is not concerned about improvement of relations between Russia and Japan, because China enjoys a very friendly relations and strategic relationship with Russia. That relationship has a very firm foundation. They have shared interests bilaterally, regionally, and globally.
Oh, really? I mean,
Yeah,
some sort have been suggesting, Mr. Jia, the China and Russia getting closer because they both have been, in a way, under pressure from the United States. But if the president-elect of the United States change his policy and at least approach to Russia, will that common ground still as big as it is today?
It remains so, actually. And actually, both China and Russia believe that they should continue with this strategic relationship, which is vital for both countries, no matter the relationship between the U.S. and Russia. And I don't believe that China has any concern over, improved relation, any possibility of improved relations between Russia and the United States. Actually, when two countries have a better relationship, China will actually have a better position. For example, now China has been so far accused by some people in the West, including the United States, about having such a close relationship with Russia. And when the United States improves the relation with Russia, what kind of reason does they have to stand against the very close relation between China and Russia?
Right.
For example, on the question of Syria, on the question of Ukraine.
And of course, that also takes a very skillful interaction from Tokyo by the Abe administration as to where does he occupy at this moment, particularly during a dramatic change, it seems, of the chessboard, Mr. Shimatsu?
Well, I think we can look at these changes in a certain sense as not something that's so new, but something that's overdue. I was, with the Japan Times in the 90s, when there was a lot of talk about signing the peace deal then in the Perestroika era, when the Soviet Union was finished, the warships, the Russians and the CIS were not investing in new war material. So at that time, it was thought that those islands, the 4 islands, would not be so strategic, sort of a gateway into the Pacific for the Russian fleet. And so at that time, we thought this peace deal would go through at some sort of compromise, at least a minimum. It would not have to be a whole far-flung deal of amity, but just basically essential that there's no reason for a conflict and they can start disengaging, their armed forces in that area and build trust. So I think the peace aspect is less surprising than Japan pulling out of sanctions. They crushed sanctions. The basic Crimea is finished. And Putin also talked at that press conference. He was asked a question. He talked about Turkey. Turkey is also sort of moved away from NATO toward more friendship with Russia.
Well,
so
see-
essentially, there is what Donald Trump talks about, a movement toward bilateral relations away from the strategic military bloc.